Hello and welcome back to the Living with Loss podcast. I've been a bit distant recently, but exams and that. But I'm back again with a fantastic guest for you, Mr. Sam Winsbury. Thank you for joining me today, mate.
Hey Joe, absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was actually a weird way, or not a weird way, but how we got in touch. Usually something I've kind of used Instagram as like a form of like kind of connecting with an audience, but I kind of felt that LinkedIn was a platform that maybe I could explore. So it was kind of a nice kind of form of connection where like the working world doesn't always need to be so corporate. You can find people and have these emotional conversations. So it was quite an interesting way, I guess, for us to get in touch. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the powers of LinkedIn, right? You've
Yeah,
obviously
for
put the
sure.
post out. We must, I don't know how we connected or how I saw your post, but I just saw it in the feed and I asked you if anyone had experiences and thought, it's something that I think we should be talking about more. So obviously dropped you the message and glad we could make it happen.
Yeah, for sure, mate, for sure. Um, yeah, but I mean, I guess I always kind of start this with the kind of generic kind of thing. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and who we're talking about today, and kind of we'll just go from there. Really.
Yeah. So Sam, obviously 22, left university 18 months ago or so, a couple of years ago. I've recently, since then, been running a business that I've built. It's kind of a business in the marketing space, build personal brands for a number of founders and CEOs. And yeah, obviously today we're discussing loss of my father, my dad, which is something that's affected me in different ways over the last 2 years. Something I haven't actually spoken an awful lot about, which is kind of the reason I wanted to do this from, I guess there is a selfish perspective here, is that it'd be quite interesting for me to kind of talk about this a little bit
Yeah, for
more.
sure.
Um, but also because, I completely buy into your mission of getting people to talk about loss more. It's something that I think we definitely need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll kind of start us off by when a loss happens, or definitely something I found was the lack of conversation amongst people our age. I lost my mum at 19. I think you might have been the same, or 20 years old, if I'm correct. But um,
Mm.
it's just the fact that when something like that happens, adults don't know how to deal with you, let alone people your own age, and you're kind of like left to fend for yourself. So really it's just nice to sit down with someone and just open up and just kind of share their experiences. And again, I'm thankful for you joining me. But when you when I guess building up to, well, I guess when your dad passed, how was that for you, being a university student, handling your studies but also dealing with this immense amount of grief?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was going into my third year at uni. So my dad passed in August, and then my third year of uni would have started in September. Obviously, a huge year for all third year uni students. Anyone that's done that will know how much of a big year it is. Um, at the same time, I was also trying to build the business that I run now and kind of setting up the early stages of that. So I had a lot going on. Was playing a lot of football at uni, had a lot of responsibility in the uni football team. So that takes up a lot of time, as well as kind of keeping up the typical social life that comes along with uni. So, I was really, really busy. It doesn't actually allow for an awful lot of reflection or time to grieve. But to be honest, for me, I think that was actually quite a positive thing. I strangely, and it always sounds really weird saying this, sometimes I feel quite guilty about saying this, in fact, is that I actually had an amazing third year of university. It was
Yeah,
one of the most enjoyable years I've had, aside from the grief I was experiencing from my dad. And it just feels so strange saying that, the year after your dad passed was actually a really good year for you, which is,
yeah,
it's odd, but it was true because I was kind of so engrossed in so many other things. I think I was very fortunate to have those things to keep me occupied. There's definitely an element and a place for having time to grieve, but I also think, making sure you're not just leaving yourself to kind of think about it 24/7 is
yeah.
important. So having those kind of outlets to escape and to occupy myself was actually really useful for me.
Yeah, I find that, very interesting actually, because I think university can be, a particularly difficult time for grief. And, it's a time where you definitely have, left you've left the comfort of home, and you've kind of you're developing yourself as a person. I for one found, I mean, I had to, I've spoken about it on the podcast, but I had to drop out of university. Well, not drop out, I had to defer the year because I was under this insatiable, this overwhelming amount of grief, and I couldn't focus, on my studies, on football, on extracurricular. So I think I guess it's more of a testament to, no, I don't want to say a testament to yourself, but I guess it's more of an interesting perspective and how grief, affects us all in different ways. And
Yeah,
it wasn't that
completely.
you were grieving any less. It was just you found a different way, I guess, to cope with it. And I think that's just particularly interesting.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely affects all of us differently, and you can't expect one person to grieve the same way as another. You can't expect one person to deal with it exactly the same as everybody else, which I think is important to appreciate when you have lost someone, is to know that. Because I was kind of at the stage recently after my dad passed where I was kind of talking about it with my family, and I was saying it hasn't, I'm obviously devastated, but I haven't yet had this big kind of crumbling sense of grief, and it hasn't really hit me. You expect it to hit you like a
Yeah.
bus, and I think part of it probably hit me in the weeks leading up to his death. So I had a little bit of it then, but then after he passed, I hadn't had this moment yet where it all really come crashing down on me. And I said to my uncle, I remember this conversation so vividly. I said to him, it hasn't really sunk in properly yet, and really hit me. So I'm kind of just worried about the time that actually happens and the time when it hits. What if it happens right for exams or whatever? And my
Yeah.
uncle actually said to me something I'll never forget. He said, "Don't pencil it in." And what he meant by that was don't plan for that grief to hit you in a certain way. Don't kind of wait for it to. You don't expect it to do a certain thing, because you might deal with it completely differently to everybody else. So you can never expect yourself to deal with it the same way as your friend or whatever. So that kind of self-awareness, I think, is really important.
Yeah. I like that word, self-awareness. And I think it's something that I've, it's definitely important in this sentiment of grief, because it's that sense of just knowing what works for you and knowing how to respond. And just because one person feels trapped, and it's very interesting actually, because I think we almost expect this kind of this mountain to just be burden us. However, it isn't always like that. And recently I found myself, there are times where it does hit me, and there are times where I am just so happy, and it's not something that I even think about. But the times, you can't plan for those moments. You can't. They're very unpredictable by nature, and it's what makes grief what it is, I guess. But something I do want to ask, before we kind of go down another route, is if you don't mind sharing, how did your dad pass? If you don't
Yeah,
mind talking about it.
yeah, of course. So my dad passed essentially from alcohol, so alcohol overdose, um, over a period of, I'm not sure exactly how long the period was, maybe 3 to 6 months. He was drinking way more than he should have done to essentially cope with depression, and got to a stage where he was, yeah, just drinking more than his body could cope with. So ended up kind of hospitalized in the summer of 2019. Um, and then over a kind of period of 2 weeks was in hospital, and unfortunately couldn't do enough to kind of save him. But it was, yeah, alcohol overdose.
And when this was occurring, did you at the time like have a conversation with him, about what the future had in store? Was that something you?
Yeah, it's such a strange time, and I know you've probably experienced a similar kind of thing to what we went through, having listened to your story over a longer period of time. But it's that period where, whilst he was in hospital, everything's running through your mind,
Yeah.
absolutely everything. And even before that, there was times before hospital where I could see the way he was going, and we'd done so many things to try and help him to get him out of the situation, but everything we seemed to do just didn't work, or he would reject. And it's very difficult to get any logic into the brain of someone suffering from alcoholism at the time.
Yeah.
It's very hard to communicate with them. So even before he was at that stage. There's everything running through your mind, like, you know, is he even going to make it to Christmas?
Yeah.
What does that mean for the family? Parents were divorced. They'd been divorced since I was much younger. So you're kind of thinking, what does this mean for family dynamic? What does this mean for him, for my future? And then you go through these periods whilst he's in hospital of, you know, we were going down pretty much every day or every other day to see him. And one day it's good news and they're going, yeah, he's recovering. There's a chance. The next day they're saying there's not an awful lot we can do. And you go back and they're going, it's good news again. And then you go back again and it's bad news. And it's that up and down where it's so unpredictable. You know what's going to happen. And that, to be honest, that is just as hard, if not harder, I think, than when you actually lose them, because you're cycling through that period of hope and despair almost. So yeah, all sorts was going on in the lead up to his death.
Yeah, I think it's the lack of certainty really does make, you know, the situation almost quite dire. I found, you know, mom had quite an optimistic outlook on life, and even in her, you know, her dying weeks, she was told, you know, she still had this kind of optimistic outlook, and that kind of gave us like this hope. But it was like you said, you know, one day there would be this kind of, okay, her results were quite positive, and you're like, okay, but what does that mean? Does this mean like she's coming home? Does this mean we have Christmas? Are we going on holiday in the summer? But, you know, the day later it could be, you know, the results were good but they weren't quite, you know, good enough. And it's, I've never had to think about my, you know, I do like to think into the future. However, I found myself thinking futures that I didn't want. I found myself thinking about, it was more so, you know, I guess they're the common things that young guys and young people who lose a parent do think about. But, you know, you know, she's not going to be there for my wedding. How will I handle that? You know, she will never see my kids. And, you know, that's something that does. And at the time it did sit on me. And I guess it is that future, you know. I found the moments before, you know, leading up to her passing was horrible. And, you know, the moment when she passed and, you know, a couple weeks after, it wasn't bad for me. That was manageable. It got worse, but, you know, that's a different story. But I found the build up very difficult, you know.
Yeah, it was, the build up for me was the hardest part of it all. Just kind of, you know, seeing someone you love in the state they're in, being that close to death, is not something you'd wish on anyone, and is extremely difficult to witness. So yeah, obviously never pleasurable to look at, but it gives you a lot of kind of appreciation for life and for what you've had previously with them as well, I think, which is also quite important.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously you said you were heading back into your final year of university. And although you know, you were saying how it was the best year, you know, of your, well, you particularly enjoyed it, were there points where you kind of had difficulties and you know, thought about your father more?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I probably thought about him pretty much every day the whole year, and I still do now. I think about him so often. As I said, didn't have that like crumbling grief that a lot of people experience. I guess fortunately for myself, but no, I thought about him pretty much all the time. Um, you know, every time you step on a football pitch, for example, and you realize he's not going to be there watching, and he's never going to watch you again, or every time, you know, you you do something well, and typically you just give him a call and tell him about how your week's gone, and you can't do it.
Yeah,
Gets Sunday and you can't just give him a bell and catch up about even really casual
anything.
things. So yeah, that side of things was really tough, really tough. You know, I'm sure it's the same for you. You do almost anything just for one more chat, just a conversation. Like, not, it doesn't even have to be about anything serious. You just want to have a conversation with a parent.
Yeah, I think, Yeah, I do also find myself, I guess in a way it could be seen as a coping mechanism. But I still message her. I WhatsApp her. I message her on WhatsApp, and it's kind of a message maybe I would send her had she been if she was around. I would send her. It'd be like, I don't know, this happened today. It made me feel a certain way, but like, I'm doing all right. Just wanted to say hi. And it's like, I'm not in disbelief. I know I'm not getting a message back. It's just kind of like a comforting blanket. But yeah, it's when you do get these things, you kind of want a response. But quickly, so when I play football, part of me in like the back of my mind, I'm like, I do think about mom when I play quite a lot. And I don't know if it's kind of not just football, but I guess in different areas, I've seen what she went through as a driving force in my life. Is that something you can relate to, or less so?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have interesting thoughts on this actually. Like, it drives me, but in a really strange way. So whenever I go through anything difficult now, it's almost, I don't know, I may be wrong, this may be completely unhealthy. I'm not sure whether it's a healthy thing to do or not. But whenever I go through something that's difficult or challenging, I always think back to, put this into a bit of perspective. Watching your dad in hospital, like weeks or days from death because he's drank too much, is difficult. Getting through the next 45 minutes of football or doing this exam or building a business isn't difficult when you put it into
Yeah,
that context with that perspective. So I almost use it as kind of a testing point or a guide of what is actually challenging in life, and also think about what other people are going through. There's people with even much worse stories than mine, and that kind of thing is difficult. It makes the trivially challenging things seem manageable, which from my point of view, I quite like it. As I said, I don't know whether that's a healthy thing or not. It's interesting.
no, I definitely agree with you on that philosophy. I think I've had, I guess, a perspective shift in a way. I think of it more from like, the fragility of time and how short our time actually is. And it's less so on I guess I look at her and what she didn't, all the things on her bucket list she may not have done, or the businesses or whatever she didn't set up. And I kind of see that now as like, well, for me it's more of, I don't know what is going to happen in my future. Of course she had cancer, but I don't know what my future holds. And based on that information, I can only live, I can only live, I don't want to be, cliche and say my best life, because what is a best life? But you can only live the best way you can, I guess. And for me, that means, if that means going to the gym at an early time to set my day the right way, I kind of, those little practices I look at, what mom went through, and I think, right, this is nothing. This is just a little, a little stepping stone. What is, working 10 hours to get a good grade? Yeah, it might be tedious and you don't want to do it. However, as you put, it's nothing in the grand scheme of things. What are, my mom as well as your dad, what they went through, and what you went through at that time. It was like, it was interesting. I think I look back to my younger self, actually, the one who was, this is 2 years ago now, and that person kind of didn't want to grieve, and he was like, he was trying to be like, this is how I felt. I don't know, obviously you might be different, but at the time I was a young guy, and I almost did not allow myself to feel upset. And I would, when I could feel it coming on, if I was going to cry, or if I would really try and hold like this stern image to really prevent it. Is that, how did you find, deal with your
Mm.
emotions when they came, or if they
Yeah,
came?
my brother did a similar thing. You've got siblings, right? How many siblings have you
Yes,
got?
yes, yeah. Younger brother and sister.
Yeah, so if it's interesting because you're from what you've just said, it sounds really similar to my brother, who's older than me, and it may be an oldest sibling
Yeah.
thing, where you try and cover up the emotions a little bit and kind of show strength for your family. And yeah, that, I mean, my brother took that approach. Kind of didn't show an awful lot of emotion for a long time. Didn't really express his grief too much, and then it all kind of hit him at once, and he had that hit by a bus moment where everything comes down on you. So he tried to kind of suppress it, which is interesting that kind of the older siblings have done that. For me, it was a case of I expressed it in my way when I wanted to. There were times where I was kind of all emotional. Like this funeral, for example, I was absolutely bawling.
Yeah.
But there are
Course,
other
like,
times that, yeah, naturally, there are other times that I wasn't as emotive about it all. But that's, I never felt like I hid my emotions around it. Quite fortunate that my family were very kind of open about all of that and encouraged us to express our emotions. So very grateful for that. But I actually found that it kind of it wiped a lot of the emotion out of me for a couple of years,
interesting.
and even until recently, probably even still now, I'm not sure I'm back to the level I was before, where for the last couple of years I've just not been that emotional about anything at all, and it really feels like it's wiped it out of me in an interesting way. Like I don't have huge kind of ups and downs anymore. It just seems like one kind of continuous flat line of emotion, which is it's really interesting. It's dulling almost, which is
Yeah.
quite difficult to deal with, but just like an interesting way
Do
that
you think that's because
it's
you're not
affected
like
me.
allowing yourself to like to feel those intense feelings?
I'm not sure. I think in a way it is. I guess it is almost an intense feeling it's in itself, but like it sounds very paradoxical, but it's like an intense dullness, and you can't
Yeah.
really do anything to get out of this sense of dullness. You've just got this like yeah, this you almost feel blunted, if that makes sense. Um,
Okay.
so I think it's almost like an expression of the grief itself.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily feel like I'm hiding anything. I just don't feel like I've got anything to express, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely, it does make sense. And I think there is something very interesting in that. In that I guess like what you said, that dulling feeling is an emotion in itself, and I can't speak why. There is, I guess, many reasons why we feel different ways, and how grief affects us. But the one thing it does do, and I think most people can who have experienced a loss can kind of share, is the fact that it makes our life, it's not linear. Thing like it puts us on a sense of, well, I guess I experienced like somewhat an emotional roller coaster, which I'm still on. Do you find yourself now randomly, you get random bursts of like memories that bring you with a bit of sadness, or fill you with joy? Like, is that something you experience every so
Yeah,
often?
often triggered by the things you see in the world that will remind you of your parents, or films or something where certain things happen. It triggers those memories. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't know. Triggers are obviously quite an intense thing. I found, I when I it's weird because when I watch, like TV or film, and there is like a one thing actually I found, is when there is like the conversation of loss or death. And let's say I'm watching a movie, with four mates. First of all, like if there's a death in the movie, all of a sudden, like if it's a death of a mum, like everyone just like looks towards me, like I'm like, cool, like do you know what I mean? Like you don't need to look at me. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, it definitely, those kind of things make you think that much more. But yeah, so if you don't mind sharing, tell me a little bit about your dad, and I guess like what he was like and your relationship with him.
Yeah. So my dad, I owe so much to my dad, and my mum equally. I owe an awful lot to my parents, the sacrifices that they've made for us. As I said earlier, my parents split when I must have been 9 or 10, divorced shortly after. So they've been split for a long time. But very civil separation. You know, no one would wish for their parents to separate. But if they're going to separate, you'd want them to do it in the way my parents did. It was very
Yeah.
civil. My brother and I, we never saw any kind of animosity between them. Everything they did once they split was all about me and my brother and giving us the best of childhood and teenage years they possibly could. So I owe an awful lot to them for that. And both of them made a lot of sacrifices for us. My dad made loads. He was unfortunate enough so just as my parents split, he lost his job. He had a pretty good job, pretty stable, well-paying job, which set us up quite nicely in my younger years. But he then lost that and was kind of in and out of jobs, struggled to find something concrete for the next few years. So he was kind of all over the country, really trying to get jobs that would allow him to serve the family almost and to give us what we needed. So he made a lot of sacrifices on that front, but I think eventually the kind of stress of it all, and I guess the burden of responsibility and not being able to get a job, kind of caught up with him. Very ambitious guy, very nice, very humble. He's known in his village as Happy Al. He was always smiling, which is quite ironic that it was ultimately depression that got him into drinking. I mean, he'd always been a reasonably big drinker, but we didn't necessarily see it as a huge problem until it was a problem, unfortunately. So that's kind of how he got into the alcohol, was through that depression. But before that, very ambitious guy, very switched on, learned a lot from him, incredibly polite, nice person, probably one of the most positive people you'd ever meet, and the least likely person you'd imagine to suffer from something like depression.
There are a few things I want to touch on, but one thing I notice is you speak in the present tense, and that's something I do. Mum is, for me, she's still, I can still like, I know she's passed, but I still like to include her as if I don't know what it is. It's not because I think she's gone, but what she stood for and how she did it has not passed for me. Like, for me, she is an amazing woman. She wasn't. It's not like that hasn't gone away because she's not here. And so I just found that quite interesting how, in with a few of the things you said, you spoke of it kind of in the present tense, which I guess is just interesting because obviously, I do that without thinking. But yeah, I obviously, you said your dad found, the responsibility, hard. And I guess this is kind of another discussion in itself, but do you think, being, a man, played a role in him, like, not, well, did he, I guess, share what he was going through and talk about it
Yeah,
with yourself?
yeah, not an awful lot. And again, that kind of shows the importance of talking about not just grief, but emotions in generally and mental health in generally. But yeah, not an awful lot. I think again, it comes down to kind of wanting to hide everything negative from myself and my brother, and I think we kind of realised over the years that actually hid an awful lot that was going wrong from me and my brother, or at least we weren't aware of it. So we didn't speak about it an awful lot. I think that was definitely played a part. Wanting to kind of be the man of the family, so to speak, and to be that provider and to have a good stable job and whatnot. Definitely played a role. We spoke a little bit about it once he was kind of in the heavy drinking phase, and we were talking about, I remember we sat him down in a living room. It was me, my brother, and some of his closest friends, and had a really frank, easily the hardest conversation I've ever had to
Yes.
witness, and kind of had a conversation about where he's at. And as I said, very difficult to get any logic into an alcoholic. But we spoke about a few things there and how he was feeling, and it was, I think, just a culmination of years of stress. He remarried after my mum, which initially was a great relationship. I'm still very close with my stepmom now. They had a good relationship until kind of just before he started getting this depression. So I think it was a case of everything kind of crumbling down at once that really hit him.
Yeah, I mean, I think depression is a really, it's a silent killer. It and you know, of course, I'm a huge advocate of discussion and you know, sitting down with a friend or a family member, or it could be a randomer on you know, the helpline, and sharing your emotions. However, I know as a you know, it might not just being a man, but it is, I think that does play a role in how difficult it is to converse with you know, I mean, you're at I mean, in his situation, his son and you know, his friends, but you know, being a man, and it's we almost have like this protective shield that, you know, we have to keep everything to ourselves, and you know, I don't know if it's because, I mean, it's perceived a weakness, but I think that definitely plays a role in how difficult it is to discuss. I mean, you know, you told me a
Yeah.
bit before how your a couple of your housemates had also experienced a loss, and that you didn't actually, you know, discuss anything with them. You know, do you think you know why that was, or?
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess it's years and years of social conditioning of, you know, men have to be this strong figure, can't show an emotion, have to just get on with the job and be a man, grow a pair, and all these phrases that have previously been chucked around kind of without thought about what they actually mean. I think we're definitely taking a step in the right direction. Things like this are great for getting men talking. I think collectively we are going in the right direction, but I think it's a natural result of hundreds of years of conditioning that men have to be this strong figure. And yeah, as you said, when I went into my final year of uni, I know for a fact, in retrospect, that there are at least two others in a six-man house that had experienced loss of a parent, but for the whole year, we just none of us ever spoke about any of it. You know, I think mine was obviously quite fresh a couple of months before we went into the year. I think theirs might have been slightly longer ago. Even now, they're some of my best mates, and I don't know too many details. It just struck me that I got to the end of the year and thought, why haven't we spoken about any of this? You know, it affects all of us, but we've not even had a single chat, even though we've got this shared thing in common and we know it's affecting us mentally. Um, so really interesting that we didn't speak about that. I think the main reason is that people don't know how to start the conversation.
Yeah.
As you know, I knew the importance of talking about my feelings, but it's just very difficult to start a conversation around such a sensitive topic. So people are now telling you to kind of talk about what you're feeling is, yeah, it's all well and good, but I think we definitely need to do more to actually help people start those conversations
Yes.
and talk about the things we can say to start them.
Yeah, I think that's very, you know, really nicely put, because you know, it's the initial, I guess, break, in the sense of, you know, sitting down with someone, and it that initial moment, and I still find it now, you know, I happily, you know, make it known that, you know, if you have something you need to share, it, I'm always, like, not always here, but you know, feel free to confide in me. But it is that initial step, that first step of you know, I find when I first start talking, or when someone you know, starts that initial conversation, you know, it just, they don't stop. It's like they have all this weight, but it's to get to that point, it takes a lot of, I guess, a lot of thinking. Like, you're not, you know, going in your uni house and just gonna sit everyone down and be like, right guys, this is, let's all have a good chat today, and you know, that's not going to happen. But
So
as you
unrealistic,
said, it's
isn't
that
it?
starting point, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so unrealistic to expect people to do that. It's I guess it's equivalent to saying to someone, if you want to get fit, go to the gym.
Yeah.
All well and good, but you're going to get into the gym. What do you do in the gym? We need to give better advice. Like, here's what you should do in the gym. These are the exercises. You know, here is how to start a conversation around loss. Here are some questions you can ask your mates about, grief, things like that. I think we need to share those pieces of advice a little bit more to actually help start these conversations.
So
That's
what
going to
would
be
you
the
say
key, I
to
think.
that? How would you say you to start those conversations? What kind of?
It's difficult. I probably don't even have all of the right answers, which is part of the difficulty. I think a lot of it comes in actually asking good questions. So asking your mates better questions, not just how are you doing today, but admitting that if you know someone's experienced a loss, you can say, look, I know you've experienced this, and I know you're probably feeling quite strongly about it. I know you've got certain emotions. It's only natural. How are you feeling today? How are you feeling about it? How have you been the last week or so? And actually asking more specific questions rather than just how are you is definitely going to help.
Yeah, I think, a lot of something I definitely experience is that, people, of course, want to offer their support and want to offer their help, but it's almost, that's kind of the bare, like, that's kind of the minimum. It's almost, in a certain way, it feels like, okay, once, you've kind of, I'm speaking kind of after the loss itself. Something I found was, I got overwhelmed with, messages and, family, friends who I haven't spoken to in 20 years, dropping, the same message, like, I'm really sorry for what you've gone through. I'm here if you need. But like, there's a part of me that thinks, like, that kind of, I'm here if you need, as you said, there needs to be, I guess it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to really sit down and ask, look, I know what's happened. I would, I would love to talk about it with you. And, what was your mom like, or what was your dad like? That's something I would really love if someone just asked me, tell me about your mom. What did she do? And it's almost like there's an awkwardness around it. So I guess, we kind of need to all do better really at just kind of, being comfortable with that sense of uncomfortability, and just, that acknowledgement that, if your mate did not want to speak about it, he's not gonna, he'd be like, look, I appreciate what you're doing, but now's not a good time. And that's okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's interesting. A lot of people, like, that perspective for you and me to understand is, it's quite easy because we've experienced the loss. I think it's probably quite difficult for people who haven't actually experienced loss to come to terms with, what would be a nice thing to say to someone that has, which is really difficult. And you can't really expect them to understand what it's like.
No.
It's not like anything you'd ever experienced before, especially when it's loss of someone extremely close to you. So yeah, it's a really difficult thing that I think collectively we need to work towards and start to inform people better of.
Yeah, I think that was kind of that. Well, that was a reason why, I started this, because as young people, there isn't, I don't know the statistics, and I guess it's not too low, but still being, in your 20s, your early 20s. I mean, I was a teenager. My siblings were, my sister was 14. Being at that age, not many people have experienced that loss. So for me, kind of discussing it, and the reason, I guess, I set this up was because of the lack of conversation I found online. When I experienced it, I was kind of struggling really. I found the university very unaware with how to kind of deal with my situation. It was kind of, I got extra time on my exams, but that's not going to bring mum back. I'm not going to, great, I've got an extra hour to talk about economic growth, but what's that going to, do you know what I mean? So it was kind of a difficulty, for people going through something like that. But yeah, I guess it all comes down to just, that kind of sense of awareness and being comfortable. But something, I do want to touch on is, we touch a little bit on, your coping mechanisms, but, what have you found that kind of particularly, works for you?
Interesting. Keeping busy is good for me, and I know this won't be something that works for everyone, but it may be something that works for a lot of people. Is just keeping myself busy, keeping myself occupied, and having things that you're working towards. I think it's very easy when you lose someone to kind of sit and go, right, I have to grieve. And I mentioned it earlier. My uncle said, don't schedule in grief. It'll come if it comes. But I think having other things to work towards and to keep you motivated, very easy to get demotivated when you lose someone close to you, and understandably so. But having things to kind of keep you motivated, keep you ticking over that you want to work towards, so you don't just kind of spiral out of controlling grief, has been really useful for me. And you don't have to be something that's actually quite trivial, but just gives you something else to interest you whilst you're dealing with that. I think that's probably the thing that helped me the most. Yeah.
And have you found kind of exercise? Is that something you because you said you went to football? Was that?
Yeah. So as you played a lot of football at university, still play football, go to the gym, a lot, exercise regularly. It's definitely, I think, to be honest, when I'm playing football, it's the only time I'm really switched off from anything, from work, from life, from grief, whatever it is. That's the only time I truly switch off. And I think you need to have an outlet like that, where you're just so immersed in it that you forget about everything else for an hour and just have time to kind of enjoy yourself is really important. You can't undervalue the power of just having fun and letting go every now and then.
Yeah, I think that sense of productivity, that when you have so much going on, sometimes you just kind of need to take a step back from it all and kind of, not feel bad about, I just made a weird noise in my mouth. I don't know how I did that, but yeah, like, there's this sense of this, I definitely find myself trying to do the most and be as productive as possible. But, I've often found that productivity, when I'm trying to be overproductive, it almost kind of regresses what I'm actually doing. And sometimes I just need that sense of hour where maybe it is, going to the gym or reading or playing football or just something to kind of escape that sense of continuous work and work ethic, and don't get me wrong, working hard is great, but sometimes you just need time to yourself and forget all your little stresses, because they mountain up, and if you're left to your head the whole time, it can be a scary place. But yeah, that's just my take on that, I guess.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on it.
Yeah, but I think this has been a really, really lovely chat, mate. Thank you for actually just reaching out. I really, really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot about your perspective. It's very, very very interesting. And I guess with all of these, you learn something new. You learn about someone, and that sense of social just discussion is so important. So yeah, I want to thank you. But I always
Pleasure.
like
Thank
to.
you so much for having me on.
No, it's my pleasure. But I love to wrap it up on kind of the same note. And if you were to kind of have a discussion, chat to your dad again, what is it you'd say?
Oh, great question. I'd say something literally as trivial as, did you watch the Fulham game at the weekend?
Nice.
Something like that. Just something. I wouldn't ask anything deep or anything, too complicated. I would just have a really simple, normal chat with him, because those are really the ones that I actually valued most and I miss the most.
That's a really nice answer. Really lovely answer. But yeah, again, thank you, mate. It's a real pleasure. And yeah.
No, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it.
I just want you to find your truth and stick to it. I know you'll be okay. I know it. From the bottom of my heart, I know it. I love you, Baba.